Alright, so I am back once again with yet another camera review, and I'm straying from the normal Nikon fare, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Alpa. So this is actually an Alpa 6A, an Alpa Reflex as it's branded, and these were made in Switzerland by a company called, I believe it's pronounced Pignons. It's kind of an odd spelling and an odd name. I don't know exactly how to spell it, so hopefully that's right. I mean, I know how to spell it, I just don't know how to pronounce it. That's the problem. Anyways, these cameras were made by a company that initially started off making watches. Apparently they also made typewriters for a while too, so just general kind of precision instruments, which is kind of interesting. They made quite a few different models of these cameras, and apparently they made a lot of custom models that were custom painted or half-frame variations or kind of unusual viewfinders that were pretty unique to one specific camera, and you could get all sorts of little parts, little bits and pieces added here and there for a small fee. They made these for quite a long time. They started making them in the late 50s, I think, and apparently they made some of the early models, such as I think the 6 and 7, up until the 1980s, from what I understand. That might not be 100% accurate information, but I have seen a couple of sources that say that. But it's kind of hard to say. There's not a ton of information about the company. There are production numbers and a lot of examples of the cameras, obviously, but the actual company itself, I haven't seen much on it. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. I just haven't really found it. So these are pretty interesting cameras because they're SLRs, but they also have a little rangefinder window, which is arguably kind of superfluous, but it's still pretty interesting. They also have kind of an unusual setup for their prism. You don't look at it straight through the back of the camera like most cameras. It's kind of at a 45-degree angle, so you're looking down a little bit. Pretty unusual. I don't think I've seen any other camera that has anything quite like that. It's not adjustable either. You can't take off the viewfinder and swap it out with a different one like you might assume from looking at it because it's a different color. It's built into the top plate. It's just, for some reason, painted black. I don't really know why, but that's how it is. The lens I got with it was a Schneider lens. It was a Xenon 50mm f1.9. It matches the camera quite nicely, but it seems like these are generally not the most well regarded. Most people prefer the I think they're called Switar lenses. I forget who made those, but you see quite a few of them around, and they're usually pretty expensive. These Schneider ones seem to be a little bit rarer, but they don't seem to be quite as valuable. But it seems like an okay lens. It's not incredibly sharp for the time period. So I went out and shot this camera at White Sands National Park, which, as the name suggests, is a place with a whole bunch of white sand. And it was a bright day, and that white sand reflected. So the lens was shot closed down pretty much the whole time. I think all the shots were taken around f11 or f16. I could be wrong. There could be a couple in there that were a little bit faster than that, but I'm pretty sure that's accurate. F16 is as closed down as the camera will go, and it only opens up to f1.9, as I mentioned earlier, which is a little odd. Normally you see 1.8s, but 1.9 is pretty much the same thing. I found the camera pretty easy to use. It's not really that different from any SLR or rangefinder I've used, and you have the options of using it as either one. You can use the rangefinder window, which, by the way, you can't focus with. It's just a tunnel viewfinder, or you can use the prism that has the focusing screen in it. One issue I ran into is with this particular camera, there's a lot of dust in the screen. I don't know how it all got in there. I've been trying to clean it out, but I don't think you can really get it out without opening the entire top plate, which I haven't done yet. And that was just a little frustration, but it's how it is sometimes with these old cameras. One thing to be aware of, I've read that when you turn the dial that advances the film, whenever you hit the shutter, it snaps backwards. And apparently in the official literature, they say you're not supposed to interrupt that in any way or it can throw off the shutter speeds. And I can kind of see that if it's all connected together in there. So you got to be careful about that because there were a couple of times it dragged against the rim of my hat or my thumb or something. I don't think I messed it up, but I could be wrong. I hope I didn't, because if you look at the images, you will notice that there is a little bit of a shutter clap, and it seems to vary from side to side. Sometimes it's on the left side, sometimes it's on the right side, but it is there a little bit. It's not overly dramatic, but you do see that kind of the black kind of streaked edge, which I gotta say in this case, it actually adds kind of an interesting stylistic thing. And I tested the lens a little bit to try and figure out where it was and how bad it was, and I can't quite figure it out because it seems like I kind of suspected that might be the case, so I tried not to shoot too many images at 1,000th of a second. But I obviously shot a couple, and I think possibly a little bit of the shutter clap could occur at the 1/500th of a second, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I didn't really keep notes, so I can't really verify that. I did notice from some tests I did when I opened up the camera and took the film out that it seems like if you cock the shutter, even at 1,000th of a second, and let it sit for a couple seconds, then fire the shutter, it kind of looks like it reduces the shutter clap, and I'm not 100% sure how that could be or why it would be or if that's even accurate, but I did find that kind of interesting. So maybe it's just an old spring that's kind of worn out, but I don't know why letting it sit for several seconds kind of fixes it. Maybe it's just Maybe it's something else. And sadly, there's very little information on these cameras, so I'd like to get out as much information as I can and kind of guide you through my journey of slowly learning how to use this camera and figuring out all of its odd quirks, because this is a pretty quirky camera. Out of all the cameras I've owned, this is probably the quirkiest. It has a lot of weird features, be it the viewfinders. The fact it has two of them is pretty odd. There aren't too many cameras built like that. That 45-degree prism viewfinder is unique to my knowledge. Even interestingly, the shutter speed dial. Normally you have the basic shutter speeds, like depending on the camera, it's usually something like 1/60th, 1/100th, or 1/25th, 1/200th, or 1/250th, and 500, maybe 1,000 on a higher end camera. And those are the only ones you can really use, and that's it. But with this camera, you can actually kind of stop. There's a lot of space in between a lot of the actual, I guess the stops, as you'd call them. And you can kind of stop and do half stops. So it shows 100, but you can kind of stop in between and do like a 125 and a 180. And again, it shows 25 and 50 as being shutter speeds, but you can kind of do more of a 40 and a 30 in there. It's kind of interesting. I've never really seen a camera that has that setup. And I could be wrong about that. That might just be some sort of flaw in the way the dial is set up, and maybe that's why I'm getting that shutter clap, is I'm not quite right on the shutter speeds. But I don't know, because again, there's very little information about these cameras. But hopefully you learned something here and enjoyed a couple of the images. I know they're really nothing miraculous, but it was kind of the best I could do given the situation. I have a color roll I shot in this camera that should be getting developed soon, and I'll do a little video on that, and hopefully with that I can do a more adequate review and talk a lot more about the lens in specific, and hopefully get some good black and white images. So stay tuned for that.